think, Marge. All I need is a title.
Following the Book of Numbers, we have the Book of Deuteronomy, which kind of sounds like a lewd suggestion. Hey dude, look at Deuteronomy. In reality, Deuteronomy is the final book of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, supposedly written by Moses. This book generally consists of looking forward into the near future, where the Hebrews will be taking over the lands of Canaan. It also looks back over the events of the Exodus and reviews the various laws dictated by God to Moses and the people. It also previews the genocide to come in Canaan, because the Hebrews are told to use similar brutal tactics in their conquest of the kingdoms south and east of the Promised Land. Now, Moses has already given over the leadership of the people to Joshua, son of Nun.
Kom lead, you judge.
Walk. Bow the throne.
And Joshua takes over the day-to-day leadership of the people, and he will be the guy to lead the Hebrews into Canaan. Moses, again, will not be allowed to enter the Promised Land as a punishment from God for lacking faith in striking the rock in Numbers 20. Moses dies at the end of Deuteronomy, and in a supreme act of look but don't touch, he dies on a mountain overlooking Canaan as Joshua is leading the Hebrews across the Jordan River. The important part about Deuteronomy is its position as a bridge between the historical texts that come before of the Hebrews leaving Canaan behind Jacob as he moves his family to Egypt during the 7-year famine, through the growth of the nation over some generations living in Egypt, through the changes in Pharaoh and similar changes in how Egyptian leaders view the Hebrews, through the Exodus and the wanderings of the Hebrews, and into the further history of the Hebrews as they take the Promised Land and establish the kingdoms of Israel and later Israel and Judah. As if seeing this momentous transition, Moses stops the people and reviews their journey, their future, and the laws handed down by God. The Book of Numbers has the Hebrews harassing the tribes near Moab and socializing and getting intimate with the Moabites. The first couple chapters of Deuteronomy show that God has told Moses not to lead the people against Moab because that kingdom belongs to the descendants of Esau. See Atheist Bible Studies number 7 for a reference. Along also with the kingdom of Edom directly to the south. However, every other kingdom south of Canaan is fair game, and they are taken out pretty quickly with the same brutish tactics that will soon be brought against the people, tribes, and kingdoms of Canaan. That is, kill all the men, women, and children, and take anything that is left for yourselves, and you can live in the cities that remain. This is completely identical to the definition of genocide, which Jews today rightly criticize because it happened to them in the middle of the last century. But when it happens in their own past, they are silent about it. Christians aren't any better on this account, as most Christians that are asked about it either excuse it or ignore this gruesome episode of Jewish and Christian biblical history. Basically, it was all great and glorious how Joshua and God led the people into the Promised Land, and if a few eggs in the form of people already living there had to be crushed into their boots, that was all the better. However, Deuteronomy only details the prelude to the larger genocide, the smaller genocide which was meant to clean out the tribes around Moab, and to perhaps spread fear into Canaan. As we've said, the rest of the book contains a review of the laws handed down by God. Chapters 1 through 4 are a rehashing of the journey from Egypt. Chapter 5 reviews the commandments. Chapter 6 reminds the Hebrews to always follow God's laws and not to test them as they did at Massah in Exodus 17 when they complained about not having water and how great things were back in Egypt, where they were slaves. The Hebrews are supposed to talk about the laws during the day and keep reminders about them on their person. Are we talking like tattoos here? The practice was called tefillin. Chapter 7 is essentially a pep talk before the people enter the land of Canaan. They are to enter the lands, conquer the people, and kill all of them, down to the last man, woman, and child. They are also not to intermarry with them, which would seem to be kind of difficult given that they are supposed to kill all of them. God then reminds them not to worship idols because repetition. Chapter 8 is a lot more repetition in the form of a review of the wanderings in the wilderness as a way for God to remind the people that, essentially, they didn't build themselves into a mighty nation. God did. And don't you forget that. Interestingly, God reminds the people not to worship other gods, which may indicate that the people at this point knew that there were other gods. In chapter 9, Moses reminds the people of the many times that they have failed and why their ancestors are not the ones to enter the promised land, and why they are not all dead because of the number of times that Moses pleaded their case before God not to wipe them out, which was at least twice. Chapter 10 includes more review of the Ten Commandments, if only to state that they were put into the Ark of the Covenant. This chapter also notes the death of Aaron and the role that the Levites will be playing in Hebrew society. Moses again admonishes the people to be loyal to God, and they agree, as if they had much choice in the matter. Chapter 11 gives a recap on what God has done for the people, with apparently a warning to them that he will withhold rain if they do not obey the laws. Moses then reiterates that if the people obey God, they will conquer all of the lands of Canaan. Chapter 12 gives specific rules against eating blood. The people must also smash the idols of other gods and bring their sacrifices to the temple of the Lord. There are a couple of interesting points brought up by some summary sites. The first is that the only major religion that used poles in their worship was the religion centered on the goddess Asherah, who in earlier times was portrayed as the wife of Yahweh. However, I would surmise that when the Book of Deuteronomy was written, either in Babylon during the captivity or in Egypt during the reign of the Ptolemies, the writers did not want to elevate women to any sort of position of power. At some point, the Catholic Church began the practice of upholding the Virgin Mary as an intercessor to Jesus, but this was not universal within the religion. Further, the demand on the people to bring their sacrifices to the temple means that other gods would not get as many sacrifices or as much money. So the writers were basically ensuring that they and their religion would have a monopoly over the people. Chapter 13 continues the rules against worshiping other gods. Chapter 14 reiterates the foods that are acceptable and those that are not. Chapter 15 contained rules on lending money, saying that loans needed to be forgiven after 7 years. Also, the chapter reiterates the rules regarding the treatment of slaves, saying that they are to be set free after 7 years. But also that if a male slave has a family and does not want to leave, the owner drives a hole in their ear and the slave is owned for life. Chapter 16 deals with rules covering some of the national festivals and reminds the people again against worshiping Asherah. Chapter 17 tells the people not to bring substandard animals to be sacrificed. Again, the people are not to worship other gods. The people will be allowed to choose a king, but that person cannot be too rich. The problem is, later, when the people complain about wanting a king, they get bitched at for desiring a king. Chapter 18 states that the Levites will be the priests of the people, and they will partake of part of the sacrifices as per the rules set down in Leviticus and Numbers. Continuing onward, the people are warned against talking to witches or ghosts or spirits, meaning apparently that either God or the biblical authors believed in those things. God also states that a new prophet will be chosen to lead the people. Chapter 19 covers the idea of cities of refuge, which protect those who commit involuntary manslaughter. However, it also deals with the penalties for murder. Chapter 20 contains various rules for warfare, including the brutal genocidal tactics used in earlier attacks. Chapter 21 contains more rules, these covering what happens when someone finds a dead body, what happens to women captured from a dead enemy, and what to do when a rebellious son drinks too much. Chapter 22 contains a mixture of miscellaneous laws. The more important ones prohibit women from wearing men's clothing and vice versa. This was probably because of the popularity of the cult of Ishtar, which emphasized fertility and cross-dressing. There are also rules regarding adultery before marriage, adultery in general, and some other marriage laws. The laws continue in chapter 23, these ones covering such things as certain people who were not allowed into the land, rules regarding what to do with bodily emissions, yes, we're talking semen and feces, folks, rules covering escaped slaves, rules against prostitution, and rules on what you can do on somebody else's lands. Chapter 24 has laws regarding divorce, kidnappings, leprosy, loans, and how to treat the poor. Chapter 25 continues the litany of laws, which get wrapped up in chapter 26. In chapter 27, the people are instructed to gather 12 stones, and 2 groups of 6 are told to stand on 2 separate mountains, where one group will bless the people, and the other group will call out curses on certain people, such as those who make idols, those who dishonor their parents, those who fail to help the needy, those who engage in improper relationships, or those who mislead a blind person on the road. Chapter 28 continues both the blessings and the curses. However, the chapter then takes a dark turn and seems to predict the Babylonian captivity. In chapter 29, we get another recap of the Exodus journey, including the wanderings in the wilderness and the conquests of the tribes of Og and Shihon. God blesses the people in chapter 30. In chapter 31, Moses informs the people that he will not be going with them into the promised land and officially presents Joshua, son of Nun, as the new leader. He places the tablets containing the laws into the Ark of the Covenant and recites a song to them. However, Moses does not have faith that the people will abide by the laws of God, in part because God told him they wouldn't. Chapter 32 is the song itself. Moses then blesses the people in chapter 33 and dies in chapter 34, with the people on the banks of the Jordan River about to cross into the promised land to face whatever awaits them. There is some contention over the idea that Moses wrote about his own death, but since the Bible does not say exactly when he died, God might have told him that he had a certain amount of time left and to get his affairs settled and make his peace with the world. Or, as some people say, perhaps the Levites wrote it. Or, perhaps none of this happened in this way at all, and the ending was written in later by scribes in order to tidy up the story, similar to the shenanigans done when later scribes wrote the Book of Mark. We've made it to the end of the first 5 books of the Bible, the books that were ascribed to Moses. However, as we have said before, there is no archaeological evidence for any of the people portrayed in any of these books. No Adam, no Eve, no Cain, no Abel, no Noah, no Abraham, no Isaac, no Jacob, none of Jacob's sons, none of the so-called pharaohs of Egypt mentioned in either Genesis or Exodus, no Moses, no Aaron, and no Joshua. These books were not meant to portray an all-powerful God, but rather a brutish, jealous, vengeful volcano god with serious anger issues. These books were written not to tell the vast truth of a supreme being, but rather as a means to pump themselves up amongst Jewish society and to make their chosen God bigger and more powerful than the gods of their neighbors. This is a good thing, because it means that the Jewish and Christian religions are outright lies and falsehoods standing on a joint foundation that is made of dust. Without Adam, you don't get David. And without David, you don't get Jesus. Without Jesus, there is no promise of forgiveness and salvation, as if there is anything to be forgiven for or saved from. We will continue through the Bible, but we have already demonstrated that the book and its philosophies and teachings are fatally flawed, and they have been since the beginning.